Rain poured down like the sky itself was crying with her. Amara stood outside the graveyard gate, clutching her newborn twins Neo and Nia, close to her chest. Her husband, Tabo, was gone. Just a week ago he was laughing, planning their future. Now he was buried in the cold ground, and she had nothing left but two tiny hearts depending on her. As she tried to find comfort from his family, they turned their backs. Mama Dinio, Tabo's mother, looked at her with eyes full of blame and whispered loud enough for others to hear, "You brought bad luck to my son." Those words cut deeper than the rain. Amara tried to explain, to beg for a little kindness, but no one listened. By the third day after the funeral, her suitcase was thrown out the door. Mama Dinio's voice echoed, "Leave this house. You've taken enough from us." Amara stood there trembling, the twins crying in her arms, rain soaking through her thin dress. The house that once held love and laughter was now closed to her forever. She had no savings, no job, nowhere to go. Just two babies and a heart heavy with grief. As she walked away into the storm, her tears mixed with the rain. But deep inside, something unbroken whispered, "Not forever." That night, under a broken bus shelter, Amara held her twins close and looked up at the dark sky. "You'll remember my name," she whispered softly. "One day you'll see what I become." Amara walked through the dark streets, her arms aching from carrying her twins Neo and Nia. The rain hadn't stopped since the funeral. Her clothes were soaked, her shoes squished with every step, and the babies cried softly, hungry and cold. She went from one house to another, knocking on doors, begging for a little shelter. But every time someone peeked out, saw her face and shook their head. "I'm sorry, Amara," one neighbor whispered, closing the door quickly. "Mama Dinio said no one should help you." The words stung more than the rain. Amara's heart broke. How could people be so afraid of an old woman's anger? She wasn't a curse. She was just a mother trying to protect her babies. But by midnight, every light in the street was off, and she was alone again. She found an old church at the edge of town, its doors locked but its roof wide enough to shield her from the storm. She sat under the arch, holding Neo and Nia close, wrapping them in her shawl. The rain dripped through cracks above her, cold drops hitting her face. She tried to stay strong, but her body shook with exhaustion. "God," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please. I don't have anyone else. Just don't let my babies suffer." The night felt endless. Every time one of the twins cried, she rocked them, humming the lullaby Tabo used to sing. The sound of thunder rolled across the sky, and she cried quietly, afraid someone might see her and chase her away. When morning finally came, she was half asleep, her head resting against the stone wall. The church doors creaked open and a gentle voice said, "My goodness, child." Amara looked up to see a woman in a blue headscarf, the pastor's wife Sibangile. Her eyes were full of compassion. Sibangile knelt beside her, brushing a raindrop off Neo's cheek. "You spent the night out here?" she asked softly. Amara nodded, ashamed, unable to speak. Without another word, Sibangile reached out her hand and said, "Come inside, child. Let God handle the rest." Amara hesitated, then took her hand. The warmth of that moment made her chest tighten. For the first time since Tabo's death, someone looked at her not with pity or judgment, but with kindness. Inside the small church hall, Sibangile brought a blanket, warm porridge, and milk for the babies. Amara sat by the fire, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Thank you." Sibangile smiled gently and said, "You're safe now. Rest. Tomorrow will be different." That night, as Amara watched her twins sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, she realized something had shifted. The storm hadn't ended, but she had found her first shelter from it. She didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness was the beginning of her second life, the moment her story started to change forever. Days turned into weeks, and life in the church shelter became Amara's new reality. The wooden floors creaked under her thin mattress, and every morning started with the sound of crying babies and church bells. She had no luxury, no privacy, but at least her twins Neo and Nia were safe and dry. That was enough for now. To survive, Amara did anything she could. She washed clothes for church members, scrubbed floors, and cooked porridge for the children who came for Sunday school. Sometimes she earned a few coins, sometimes nothing at all. Her hands stayed raw from soap and water, but she never complained. Every night after feeding her twins, she would whisper to them, "You'll never suffer for love like I did. I promise." The other women in the shelter admired her quiet strength. "That girl doesn't stop," they often said. But Amara's mind was always busy, between exhaustion and hope. She kept a small piece of paper where she drew dress designs late at night, using a dull pencil she found near the church gate. The drawings helped her forget the pain, even for a few minutes. Her sketches were inspired by the world she saw, the colors of the sunset, the shape of the church windows, even the way rain made patterns on the floor. She didn't have fabric or tools, but she had imagination. "One day," she whispered to herself, "I'll make something beautiful." One afternoon, while hanging laundry outside, a kind woman named Lindio, a social worker who often visited the shelter, noticed her drawings scattered beside a laundry basket. She picked one up and said softly, "Did you make this?" Amara froze, embarrassed. "It's just something I do when I can't sleep," she said quietly. Lindio smiled warmly. "You have a gift, Amara. Don't bury it. The world needs hands that create beauty." Those words hit Amara harder than she expected. No one had ever called her gifted before. For so long, people had only called her cursed, poor, or broken. That one compliment felt like sunlight in a dark tunnel. That night she couldn't sleep. Her heart raced with a strange new feeling, hope. She sat under the dim church light, sketching again, this time with a purpose. She imagined her designs on women walking proudly through markets and streets, wearing colors that told stories of strength and survival. Neo stirred beside her, reaching out his tiny hand, and she smiled through tears. "One day, my loves," she whispered, "we'll build a life no one can take from us." Amara didn't know how or when, but something had awakened inside her. That single moment, a kind word in a paper bag full of dreams, was the spark that would soon change everything. Amara's tiny corner in the church shelter slowly turned into something magical. With the help of Sibangile and the other women, she found an old sewing machine that hadn't worked in years. After cleaning it, tightening the screws, and saying a little prayer, it started to hum again. That sound, soft and steady, felt like music to her heart. She began sewing small things first: baby blankets, aprons, and church scarves, using bits of fabric people donated. But soon her ideas grew bigger. She started making dresses for women in the church, using scraps that others thought were useless. Her designs were unlike anything anyone had seen, bright colors mixed with bold patterns, stitched together with meaning. Each dress told a story, one about loss, one about courage, one about hope. When the women wore them on Sundays, heads turned. People whispered, "Who made that?" And the answer spread, "Amara the widow." At first, she only charged a few coins, just enough to buy food for Neo and Nia. But word of her work traveled fast. Soon, women from nearby streets came to see her, bringing their own old clothes, asking her to make it beautiful again. And she did every single time. She'd smile softly and say, "Every fabric deserves a second chance, just like us." Her little sewing space became full of laughter and colors. The women who once pitied her now came to learn from her. Even the pastor's wife, Sibangile, wore one of her dresses and proudly said during service, "This was made by our own Amara." One sunny afternoon, a woman with a camera walked into the church hall. She introduced herself as Zanil, a fashion journalist from the city who was visiting to write about community projects. When she saw Amara's dresses hanging neatly across the room, her eyes widened. "Who made these?" she asked. Amara blushed and said shyly, "I did, ma'am. Just small work I do for the ladies here." Zanil smiled and started taking pictures. "Small work. These are incredible. Every stitch tells a story." She interviewed Amara, asking about her journey, her twins, and how she turned scraps into beauty. Amara spoke softly, but her words carried power, the kind born from pain and faith. A week later, everything changed. A church member ran inside one morning, waving her phone and shouting, "Amara, you're on the internet." The headline read, "From Widow to Wonder, the seamstress who stitches hope." The article shared her story and pictures of her work. People across the city were moved. Some cried. Some wanted to help. Others wanted to buy her dresses. Within days, her phone, a small borrowed one, wouldn't stop ringing. Orders poured in from all over the city. For the first time, Amara looked at her twins and smiled with tears in her eyes. "See, my loves," she whispered. "Mama's hands are finally building our tomorrow." The same hands that once begged for mercy were now creating something the whole city admired, hope stitched in every seam. Amara's life began to change faster than she could believe. With the help of Sibangile and the church community, she saved every coin she earned. People who once ignored her now came to support her, donating sewing machines, fabric, and even renting her a small shop space near the market. On the day she opened her own studio, she stood in front of the sign and smiled through tears. Twin threads, named after her babies Neo and Nia. Inside, the walls were simple, painted white, but full of warmth and color. Rolls of fabric lined the shelves, and the soft sound of the sewing machine filled the air. Amara worked long hours, her twins playing quietly in the corner, surrounded by colors and laughter. Every dress she made carried her secret mark, a small red heart stitched inside the hem. It was her reminder that love, not pain, would define her story. Soon word spread that Twin Threads was different. Women didn't just come for clothes, they came for comfort. Amara listened to their stories, many of them single mothers, widows, and abandoned wives. She knew their pain because she had lived it. When her business grew, she decided to hire them. "If I rise," she said, "I'm taking others with me." The studio became more than a workplace. It became a home for women who had nowhere else to go. They sewed, laughed, prayed, and sometimes cried together. When one woman couldn't afford food, Amara shared hers. When another's baby was sick, she closed the shop early to help. Her kindness spread like light, quiet but powerful. The dresses themselves told the story of their strength. Each piece was vibrant, full of life, and designed with a purpose. Customers from across the city loved the detail, especially the tiny hidden heart. "It's like wearing hope," one woman said. Soon, Twin Threads became known as the studio that healed more than it sold. As the weeks passed, Amara's story began reaching beyond her small town. Bloggers wrote about her, women's groups invited her to speak, and her name started appearing on social media. Still, she stayed humble, telling everyone, "I'm just a mother trying to make a better life." Then one afternoon, a black van pulled up outside her shop. Two people stepped out with cameras and microphones. "Are you Amaran Cube?" they asked with smiles. "We'd love to share your story on television." For a moment, Amara froze, remembering the night she stood in the rain, homeless and heartbroken. Now she stood surrounded by color, laughter, and love. She looked around at the women she'd helped and the twins playing in the corner, then smiled. "Yes," she said softly, "I'm Amara. Welcome to Twin Threads." That day marked a turning point, the moment her pain transformed completely into purpose. What once began as survival had now become strength, and her story was ready to inspire the world. The day the TV crew arrived, Amara could hardly believe it was real. The same woman who once slept outside a church with her newborns was now being filmed in her own studio, a bright space full of color, laughter, and hope. The cameras rolled as she adjusted her twins' clothes and wiped a little dust from Neo's cheek. Nia tugged at her hand and whispered, "Mama, are we famous now?" Amara laughed softly and said, "Not famous, my love, just grateful." The crew filmed her working at her sewing machine, surrounded by women who had once been forgotten, now stitching their way to dignity. Every corner of Twin Threads buzzed with life, fabric rustling, scissors clicking, the sound of quiet joy. When the interviewer asked how it all began, Amara paused, her voice trembling. "I lost everything," she said softly. "My husband died, and I was thrown out with nothing but these babies. They called me cursed. But these little ones," she squeezed their hands gently, "they became my blessing." There was silence in the room. Even the cameraman looked moved. Her words carried something no script could. Real pain, real strength, and a quiet kind of victory that came from surviving storms no one thought she would. The interview continued as Amara shared her journey. The sleepless nights in the church, washing clothes for coins, drawing designs on paper bags, and the moment someone believed in her talent. "Sometimes," she said, smiling through tears, "you just need one person to say, 'You can do it.' For me that was Sibangile. She saw me before the world did." When the cameras turned off, the interviewer hugged her. "You've touched my heart, Amara. People need to hear your story." The episode aired that weekend. At first, Amara didn't think much of it. She didn't even own a TV. But by morning, her phone was full of messages. Old friends, neighbors, and even strangers from across the country were reaching out. Her name was trending online. People shared clips of her interview, writing things like "a true inspiration" and "the widow who turned pain into power." By the second day, reporters were waiting outside her shop. Customers lined up around the block. Women cried as they hugged her, saying, "You gave us hope, Amara. You reminded us that we can start again." Her twins didn't fully understand what was happening, but they laughed seeing their mother's face on phones and billboards. "Mama," Neo said proudly, "you're on TV." Amara smiled, looking at her children, the reason she kept fighting when the world shut its doors on her. "Yes," she whispered, "but the real show isn't on TV. It's here, in our hearts." That moment changed everything. She was no longer just a widow trying to survive. She had become a voice for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. The episode went viral, but her message spread even faster. That broken doesn't mean defeated, and from pain, something powerful can rise. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Mama Dinio's house. The smell of fried eggs and tea filled the air, and her sons sat around the table, scrolling through their phones. Everything seemed normal until the youngest son suddenly froze, his eyes wide. "Mama, is that Amara?" he whispered. Everyone looked up at the TV, and there she was. Amara, glowing with confidence, standing on a big stage beside the country's president. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Founder of Twin Threads, Amaran Cube, empowers hundreds of women nationwide. Her designs, born from struggle and hope, are changing lives across Africa. The spoon slipped from Mama Dinio's hand, clattering onto the floor. The room went silent. No one moved. They just stared at the screen, watching the same woman they had thrown out in the rain now smiling proudly, shaking hands with the president. She looked radiant, wearing one of her own designs, a bold red dress with a small heart stitched near the hem. She's on national television," one of her sons muttered, his voice full of disbelief. Mama Dinio's heart pounded. Memories flooded back, Amara crying on her doorstep, clutching those babies, begging for a chance to stay. The cruel words she'd said that night echoed in her mind. "You brought bad luck. Leave this house." Now the whole country saw her as a hero. On the screen, the reporter continued, "Twin Threads has become a safe haven for single mothers and widows. Amaran Cube's foundation now supports education and training programs for women in need." Mama Dinio's face tightened. "Turn that off," she snapped, her voice trembling. But her sons didn't move. They were too stunned. The oldest finally said, "Mama, she did all that without us. She made it." His words cut through the air like a blade. Mama Dinio stared at the blank TV after they turned it off. Her pride, once so heavy, now felt like a chain around her neck. "We gave her nothing," she whispered. "And she became everything." She tried to convince herself it didn't matter, that Amara must have been lucky, that someone else helped her, but deep down she knew the truth. It wasn't luck. It was strength, the kind she never believed Amara had. Outside, neighbors were already talking. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages. "Mama Dinio, isn't that your daughter-in-law? You must be proud of her." But pride wasn't what she felt. It was shame. As she sat in silence, her tea growing cold, she realized karma had come quietly, not with revenge, but with success so bright it burned. The girl she'd called a curse had become a blessing to others. The woman she threw out with nothing had returned to the world with everything. And now, all Mama Dinio could do was sit and watch, her heart heavy with regret, knowing it was far too late to undo what she had done. Months later, Amara's car rolled slowly through the same dusty road she had once walked barefoot, carrying her newborn twins in the rain. But this time she wasn't broken. She wasn't begging for shelter. She had returned home, not with anger but with purpose. Her name was now known across the country. Twin Threads had grown into a powerful movement for women, and Amara had come back to give something to the place that once turned its back on her. On the land where her late husband's family house once stood, the same house where she was thrown out, she built something new. The building was bright and beautiful, painted in soft yellow and gold, with a sign that read, Twin Threads Women's Training Center. It was a place where widows, single mothers, and young girls could learn to sew, design, and build a future of their own. The opening day was full of people, women from nearby towns, reporters, even local leaders. There was laughter, music, and hope in the air. Amara stood on the small stage, dressed simply in white, holding the microphone with steady hands. Her twins, now a little older, stood proudly beside her. "This," she said softly, "is for every woman who was told she couldn't make it. We rise not in anger but in love." The crowd erupted in applause. In the distance, hidden behind the crowd, Mama Dinio watched quietly. Her once proud shoulders were now slouched with guilt and age. She hesitated for a long time before walking forward, trembling slightly. When she reached Amara, the crowd fell silent. The two women stood face to face for the first time in years, the woman who had been cast out, and the one who had cast her out. Mama Dinio's lips quivered as she whispered, "I didn't know you'd make it, Amara." Her eyes were full of regret, her voice barely steady. Amara looked at her calmly, a small, peaceful smile on her face. "You didn't have to believe in me," she said softly. "I believed in myself." For a moment no one spoke. The crowd erupted into claps, some even wiping tears. That powerful sentence, full of grace, forgiveness, and quiet strength, was captured by cameras and shared across the nation. It became the most watched clip of the year. As the sun set, Amara walked through the center's hallway, watching the women laugh and sew together. Her heart felt light. She had returned to the same ground that once broke her, and rebuilt it into something that could never be destroyed again. She didn't just come back to prove them wrong. She came back to prove that kindness, faith, and self-belief could heal anything. Years passed, and Amara's life looked nothing like the woman who once cried on church steps with two hungry babies. Her twins had grown into confident, kind young adults who adored their mother. They worked beside her every day at Twin Threads, proudly telling anyone who asked, "Our mother taught us to build, not beg." It became their family motto, one that hung framed in every store Amara opened. Her business had grown far beyond what she ever imagined. What began with scraps of donated fabric now had branches in cities across Africa, from Lagos to Nairobi to Cape Town. Her dresses were worn by powerful women, brides, and even television hosts. Every piece still had that same secret, a tiny red heart stitched inside, a reminder of where it all began. Reporters often came to interview her, expecting to meet a fashion mogul. Instead, they found a humble woman who still served tea to her staff and greeted every new employee with a hug. When asked about her success, she always said, "It's not just my story. It's every woman who was told she couldn't make it, and did." Her words inspired thousands, but her actions changed lives even more. With the money she earned, Amara didn't buy mansions or luxury cars. Instead, she started the Widow's Hope Foundation. She built shelters for women who had lost everything, just like she once had. She provided them with sewing machines, skill training, and small loans to start their own businesses. Many of them called her Mama Amara, not just because she helped them, but because she believed in them when no one else did. In one emotional TV interview, Amara walked through one of the shelters she built. She paused at a sewing table and ran her fingers over the cloth. "This," she said softly, "is where healing begins, in creation, not in pity." Tears filled the eyes of everyone watching, and that moment spread across social media like wildfire. People from all over the world sent donations, messages, and love. Her story became more than a tale of survival. It became a movement, a symbol of strength, dignity, and the power of faith. Even schools began teaching her story to young girls, reminding them that no one is too small to rise. Amara's twins often watched their mother with pride, knowing that every stitch she made was part of something far bigger, a legacy of love that would outlive them all. And every night, when Amara closed her studio, she whispered a quiet thank you, for the pain that pushed her, for the faith that guided her, and for the love that grew stronger than any curse. The hall was filled with bright lights and applause as Amara walked up to the stage to receive the Woman of Strength award. Cameras flashed, music played softly, and the crowd stood to cheer for her, the woman who had once been thrown out with nothing but her twins and faith. Dressed in one of her own designs, a long gold gown with a red heart stitched near the sleeve, she looked every bit like the queen she had become. When she took the microphone, her voice was calm but full of emotion. "I used to think my pain was punishment," she began. "But now I know. Don't curse your storms, they water the seeds of greatness." The room went silent, then erupted in applause. Many people wiped their tears. Some of the women she had helped were in the audience, clapping the loudest. Far away, Mama Dinio sat in her living room watching the ceremony on TV. Her sons were silent beside her. As Amara's speech played, Mama Dinio's eyes filled with tears. The same woman she once called cursed was now honored by the nation. Her heart ached with guilt and pride, because she finally saw the truth. Karma had come, but not with revenge. It came dressed in grace, power, and success. The world saw what Mama Dinio had tried to destroy, a woman reborn from rejection, shining brighter than ever. As Amara held her award high, her twins ran to the stage and hugged her tightly. She smiled through tears and whispered, "We made it." And at that moment the entire world felt her victory, a victory of love, faith, and unstoppable strength.